Check, check, check. Hello, hello, hello. You can hear me. I can't hear you. My mic is working. Hello, world. How are you? This is the Seek Safely podcast. I don't know, man. Vicky says that she can't hear you either. Nobody can hear Jean. Nobody can hear. Can anyone hear Jean? Anybody at all?
Yeah.
Hello, Judy. Hello, Vicky. Now I can kind of hear Jean.
Okay, so here's
Jean
the thing. I was like, I feel like maybe I'm getting a little too comfortable with this whole like Kirby Jam Seek Week, the live streams. Like I'm feeling, it's Wednesday night. This is what, the fourth night. I'm like, yeah, we got this. It's good. Kiss of death.
Kiss of death. But you have coping skills. You
I do.
have skills and tools, and look at this. We recovered. We did exactly.
Fine.
We breathed. We blinked. We focused. Fine. We're fine, Jean Brown. This whole week has really kind of felt like an extended version of our podcast.
It has. I know, it's been pretty fun.
Like basically, we our podcast ain't just us talking to each other about self-help and stuff anyway, and we will have guests, and that's just what we've done this week. We had your mom, we had Christine. This is just it's Seek Safely podcast marathon edition.
Sorry, the marathon edition.
There we go.
Yeah, of course, on when we record the podcast, because we haven't done video podcasts yet, although we're considering doing that.
Does the world?
I never have to worry. I never have to worry though when my hair is up in a bun and I look bald when it's the podcast. Whereas now on video, I'm like, oh well, just the bald version.
You think you look bald? Why would anybody want to be bald? Why? Don't.
But like, if you're supposed to be bald, it's fine. I'm not. I actually have quite a lot of hair. So
if you're supposed to be bald, there's a registry of people who are supposed to be bald. I don't know if you could go back and tell my 20-year-old self that I was supposed to be bald. I started losing my hair. Gosh, probably like right after high school. Because I remember, so during that period of time where, I guess I dropped out of college and I was like doing dinner theater. And this is when I first started noticing it, because they would take video of these productions that I was in, and the spotlight, like the lights of the theatrical production would like highlight this growing bald spot that I had. and you guys, you don't even know, I had this beautiful mane of red hair. It was great.
That's right.
It was curly. It was sexy. Yeah. I am. I'm a ginger. You can see the remains of a once great civilization there at the top part of my beard. But then when I turned, I guess it was on my 30th birthday. It must have been. I think I was a postdoc, and it was my birthday, and I decided, you know what? I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to do it. I'm going to just beat it to the punch.
I'd been lean into it.
I was going to lean into it. For years, I had been trying to do like the George Clooney, like comb it all down forward and pretend that it's not happening.
Yeah, that was a thing for a while. Yeah.
George Clooney and I are about equal in attractiveness, so I figured I could pull it off. I've often been told that I'm basically the George Clooney of self-help.
There you go. Go for it. Run with it.
James Arthur Ray claims to be the Dark Knight of self-help. He does. I'm not even kidding. That's a thing he says. He goes around trying to say he's Batman. So if he can be the Dark Knight, I can be the George Clooney. I guess not anymore. Now I can be the who would I be? The Lex Luthor?
The
Yul Brenner?
Oh. I don't know. Bruce Willis.
The Bruce Willis. Oh my God, that's a good one. I can be Bruce Willis of self-help. Anyway, so, what are we doing tonight, Jean?
Well, it has felt like an extended edition of the podcast. And tonight is like our podcast sizzle reel. So we're going to be revisiting some of our favorite little snippets of the podcast and then kind of reliving some of those episodes through those little clips. Yeah, so as we've mentioned, we had recently wrapped up the second season. We're definitely gonna launch our third season imminently. Once we're kind of done with this, and we'll be able to actually record some more stuff for the third
You
season.
laugh when you say imminently. Imminently. Guys, to really appreciate why Jean is laughing, you need to know the respective time management styles of one Dr. Glenn Patrick Doyle and Jean Brown. We are awesome at this. We have great big plans. We're like, oh, we're gonna do this. And then like the week to record comes up, and we're like, oh man, it's tonight. And then it's almost like sometimes we do it on the fly, but that's how good we are. We can do it on the fly. And then Will makes us sound awesome. Our engineer, Will.
We get pretty good stuff out of it, even when, we always prepare. And I think, I don't know, this is how I operate anyway. I always feel like I'm procrastinating, but I know that actually there's a lot of stuff going on where I'm preparing mentally for something so that when I get to the point of actually finally doing the thing, it's kind of all there already. So I'm going to say that's what happens. That's what we do.
Exactly what happens.
So before we get into our clips, we had a question on Facebook. Are the podcasts on Facebook? Where do I find them? The video is fun. Video is fun. So the podcast, basically, it's everywhere you'd get a podcast, like Apple Podcasts. What are the other ones? Spotify. Kind of just all the big podcasting platforms. So chances are on your phone or device, you'll have some sort of podcast app that you could search up, Seek Safely, and find our podcast there.
If you Google, sorry to interrupt you. If you Google Seek Safely podcast, it will take you somewhere where you can find us.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also find it through our website. It'll just take you to a webpage where you can listen to it. We are kind of looking to put the first 2 seasons of the podcast on YouTube, kind of put them in a video format that's more like a listening video format, but it'll be there on YouTube where you can listen to it. And then, frankly, if you like the video, part of the reason we do things like fundraisers is because we want to have money to be able to produce video podcasts. Adding the video element to it is like another level of expense for the podcast. So we would like to bring that to you, but it's just a matter of, we are a very small organization with a small budget. So it's always a matter of what we can do with what we have. So, but that is something we would like to do because we've gotten that question from people before.
We're a small organization with a small budget, and then we do things like send Jean Brown to Mexico.
That makes it sound so bad.
No, that makes it sound like we are committed to our international presence.
Yeah.
So this is a fundraiser. So if you guys go to the Dr. Glenn Patrick Doyle page, it's pinned at the top of the page. You can also go to my Twitter. My pinned tweet takes you to like if you're not so hot on the Facebook fundraiser, you want to just donate straight to the org. My pinned tweet on Twitter. I guess it's not Twitter anymore. It's now x.com.
Whatever.
But that contains a link where you can go donate. But no, I'm joking about sending Jean to Mexico. I'm not joking about that. We did send Jean to Mexico, but the reason for that is because think about the fact that for a decade now, I thought about this. Like it's been 10 years, right? Like wasn't it 2013 when James was released from prison? And
2011. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So for a decade, Seek has been, the most consistent voice in the conversation about the problems of the self-help industry. And the fact that Seek has been able to do it on this like shoestring budget. And we've been able to do things like the conference in Mexico, the conference in Kentucky that we presented at, the Cult Studies Conference in Kentucky. The very fact that we've been able to put together a podcast that's produced by the same folks who do podcasts like A Little Bit Culty, with our friends Sarah and Nippy. Why don't I get a cool nickname like Nippy? Come on. Anyway, no, the very fact that we're able to do this is like it's entirely due to our supporters. It's mostly small level supporters, like, you know, like the $5, $10, $15, $20 donations.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's why we do this. And we thank you guys so much. I see a couple names who I know have already donated this year. We appreciate you so much.
Yeah. We're so grateful for everybody's support and for donating and for showing up. This has been great this week. We've had a lot of engagement, a lot of people coming each night. It's been really fun and really encouraging and pretty exciting.
Oh.
And so, yes, like you're saying, Glenn, you know, we have been this kind of consistent voice. And so it was over this, for a few years, it was kind of a dream of ours to start a podcast, because we've always been like, all right, how do we get our message out there to people? Our message feels to us pretty simple if you want to break it down to its simplest terms, it's literally just seek safely. It's just take that minute of pausing before you jump into some kind of self-help program or before you put some money behind some kind of self-help guru. Just take a minute to evaluate what you're getting into and what you're committing to. It's a pretty simple message, but for a long time, it felt like we were just kind of building all the information. We have a lot of information on our website, seeksafely.org. But yeah, it felt like we were building that information, but it was like, are they coming? How do we get the people to come and see this and hear this? And a podcast felt like an obvious way to get that message out there.
Well, my big plan, if you remember, was to build a baseball diamond in the back of Ginny and George Brown's house.
Right.
Because, I mean, it was my understanding if we build it, they will come.
Exactly.
But Gene had to explain to me.
The problem is that we didn't have ghosts with pretty enough eyes that could, come out of the woods to inspire people. So
ghosts with pretty enough eyes. Wow.
Hey, Ray Liotta. Beautiful.
Rest in peace, man. He's no longer with us. I can't believe it.
I know.
I can't believe it. You know, something that occurs to me a lot when we talk about the mission of the org. So our founder, Ginny Brown, has always been very big on the educational aspect of our mission, like the educational and empowerment aspect of our org. And I always feel compelled to follow up on that, because we're not actually saying that when people are exploited by the self-help industry, it's because they missed a red flag necessarily, right? It's not that you didn't know something that you should know. It's not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
What we're actually saying is that, and I know I sound like a broken record when I say this stuff, but what we're actually saying, Jane's like, you frequently sound like a broken record. No, what we're actually saying is that the self-help industry, by the very way that it is structured and the way that it exists right now, it is specifically designed to deceive you. It is specifically designed to exploit you. This isn't an industry, like I know I've said it so many times. It's not just the fact that this is an industry with bad actors in it. Every industry has bad actors in it. The psychotherapy industry, believe me, it's an industry. It has bad actors in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The problem is not just bad actors, and the problem is not consumers missing red flags. The problem actually is the way that the industry operates and the way the industry has been allowed to operate by the complete lack of regulation, oversight, and awareness on the part of the government and the public. So we're trying to kind of fill that last gap, that lack of awareness. Yeah. I think a lot of people think that, well, man, self-help stuff, you do you, right? And you know what? We've heard it so many times that, you get out of it what you put into it, right? You do you.
Yeah.
What we are saying is, again, it's an industry that is fiendishly designed. It has evolved in such a way to actually deceive consumers. And that's where the educational piece comes in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's this kind of, it's almost like a misconception that's also built into it, where, like you're saying, it's putting it on you do you, it's putting it on the consumer as though everything is in your control and everything is your choice. And that's how it should be. But the problem is that you end up getting these people who are really manipulative in a lot of unexpected and disappointing ways, right? That you're not necessarily anticipating when you're looking for these resources. So, but it's always presented as, well, I mean, it was all your choice. It was always in your control. You were always the one in charge, when that might not actually be the reality. So yeah, it's important for people to be really like protective of that kind of role of staying in charge of their own self-help journey, and that it can be hard when you've got opposing forces. So
I so often say, I so often, do you hear that? Do you hear?
I am well aware of the squeaky chair. Yeah.
You know what? We really should have put this on the auction. Tried to get rid of my famously squeaky chair. It's gotten worse too.
We're gonna have to have a separate fundraiser for a new chair for a new chair.
No, look, I often say like the people who follow me usually follow me for trauma recovery and addiction recovery content. And if you follow my stuff, you're well aware of my broken recordness. But one of my spiels is that, look, trauma and addiction create changes in our life that we don't choose. Recovery is all about creating changes that we do choose. It really is about taking control of our journey. A big part of taking control of our journey, as we know, is realizing where we're not in control, or we can't be in control, finding that wiggle room. But we're saying much the same thing about your self-help journey as well. You really need to be in the driver's seat there. You're going to run into plenty of gurus who say that the key to your self-help, your success in this personal improvement journey is to completely trust and to go all in and don't worry about it. We really, really reject that point of view. We get it. It's seductive. This idea that, I'm just going to completely trust this guy, this person. Right. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to, I'm going to take the Indiana Jones leap. We've seen where that ends up.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have podcast stuff. Yeah, we have clips.
I'll try not to make this super janky.
She'll try not to make it super janky, guys. That's your Gene Brown guarantee.
I'm gonna try to change your screen so we can
footage.
See and hear and be at the same time. So let's see what happens. I'm gonna play our first clip here.
This idea of, boy, your problems happen because you break promises to yourself. Mm-hmm. Like that's this cherished precept of self-help culture in kind of in our society. And when I say that it's kind of this pattern, it plugs into a human vulnerability and this particularly if you have trauma in your background, you come from the factory already believing that it's your fault. You come ready to buy into this, like, of course, it's going to sound like a wise guru because it's just resonating with your propensity to blame yourself in the first place, right? And ostensibly, these programs will teach you to not break promises to yourself. Well, okay, until you run into any kind of difficulty, which you will, because it's life, right?
Right. Yeah, pretty much exactly what we were just saying, right?
It's almost like we've got the spiel down. It's almost like we've got the spiel down. So that was the episode. I assume that was the episode around trauma recovery. Was that the Teal Swan episode?
That was actually kind of like our first episode, just getting back into the second season. But I think we were talking about the fact that we were going to do an episode specifically about trauma.
That whole spiel about breaking promises to ourselves is such a common self-help trope. And I can tell you the reason I was probably thinking about it at the time. It's one of James Arthur Ray's kind of cherished things. Like he loves putting this thing out there that's success is a matter of keeping the commitments you make to yourself. And he famously says, you know, how you do one thing is how you do anything. You got to keep your promises to yourself. And I'm like, if I thought that how I do the thing that I like least and that I'm least motivated to do is necessarily how I'm doing everything in my life, I would think I'm a really crappy person, right?
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous generalization.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Is that really what my voice sounds like, guys? Really? Is that me? Oh,
it's okay. It's okay.
Sorry.
All right. Here's from our second episode.
Do you know what these are in advance, or are we told?
You know what? It's funny. We're getting a little bit surprised. I definitely put them all in there just with the title, like the number.
Oh, I love it.
Number.
So it's mystery clip.
It's mystery clips, but no, I've got it now. I know what we're looking at. I know.
Okay.
I'm very well prepared. We're good. It's all good. All right. So no, the second clip, this is from our second episode, which is when we spoiled the secret. I actually and we know we like this episode.
Yeah,
Here we go. That idea, like the way you're describing the thoughts and brainwaves being a delicate form of energy that can have an incremental, slow impact over time, that actually sounds great. Right? But then I think what happens is the law of attraction, in order to attract its own audience, it pushes way beyond that. You know, way beyond being this small kind of unobtrusive idea. It gets really kind of aggressive almost in the way that it's packaged and marketed. Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. And this is that's what I sound like. I'm just like a slow pause kind of talker I hear when I listen back to the podcast. I'm like, oh, Jean, just please keep going. Keep going.
You have such a relaxing, measured voice. You don't even know. You have such you could do ASMR.
Oh God. Maybe I should supplement my income with some ASMR.
I want to see Jean Brown ASMR, and you're just saying things that living in Canada. So just a list of words like about and what else is there, guys? A boot.
And nobody says a boot. I feel like we talked about that on the podcast actually too. Nobody says a boot. It's like about.
I used to date a girl from Canada. She said a boot.
Yeah.
She did.
She's probably from like, I don't know, Saskatchewan or something.
She was from a place called Brampton. If I remember.
Oh,
is that a place?
Ontario. That's not far from me. That is a place. Yes.
She's not listening right now. I guarantee she's not listening right now. Anyway.
It's okay. All of our listeners agree that A, we have nice voices, and B, we all hate what we sound like. So
fair enough.
Oh yeah. So no, I remember in this Law of Attraction episode, we actually spent a lot of time being quite complimentary to the Law of Attraction. We were saying there were things about it as a concept, as an idea that we actually feel like, yeah, they make a lot of sense, or we can understand how it would be beneficial in our lives. It's when it gets taken to that extreme place. So actually I pulled another clip from that episode because I know that we really like that one. I'm just going to play it so we can keep talking about it.
Yeah.
This one, I think we're going to just hear.
That whole idea of ask in faith and according to your faith, it will be granted unto you, right? It really illustrates how that idea has been used as this backdoor for when it doesn't work.
Right.
Because it provides this ready-made, like we were talking about this last season. I think when we were talking to Eva Collins, we like this came up, this idea that, well, man, if our version of the world is right, and if, you will always get what you ask for, if you ask in faith, and if you don't doubt, well, the fact that you're not getting it means what?
Mm-hmm.
You clearly doubt it, right? that the faith is not there. And it necessarily gives secret teachers kind of this back door to kind of evade responsibility.
Right. Because the problem is never with the teaching. It's always with the student.
That whole idea of.
Yeah. And we saw this, we talked about that, I remember as well in the first season of the podcast when we kind of revisited the vow, talking about NXIVM, how they really they built that kind of self-protection into the whole program, into, everything they're asking you to kind of sign on to right from the get-go. It's always pushing all of the responsibility back on the customer and exonerating, before anything has ever even happened, exonerating the teacher or the organization. And it's one of those ways that we see self-help actors manipulate law of attraction concepts to protect themselves.
You see this interestingly, because I was thinking about this. It's not just in that law of attraction self-help subset. You see this in other places too. The Church of Scientology, which, by the way, would be a fantastic episode for us, because how do people get sucked into Scientology? It's usually via some self-help stuff. Right. I myself bought a copy of Dianetics when I was a senior in high school. Luckily, I gave up on it because it's gibberish. But I think, in my opinion, we're going to get sued. In my opinion, I struggled with it. Maybe that's my problem. But so you see people leave Scientology because allegedly it's a very abusive organization, very financially exploitative, very emotionally exploitative organization. But then you've seen some people become independent Scientologists because their spiel is, well, it's not the problem with the thing. It's the problem, they're just doing it wrong. Right. And if you do Scientology right, it's not exploitative. You see this with lots of cult escapees. You saw it with NXIVM, right? Well, the tech is fine. It's the guy that was the problem. The tech is fine. And I think that we need to revisit this idea that, man, when the tech itself is talking about how if you fail, it is necessarily an indication that you didn't believe hard enough, right? Then it's not the guy, whoever hawks that is going to be exploitative, because it's an exploitative philosophy necessarily.
Yeah. We've got a comment. I had to leave Christian groups because so many suffering people were blaming themselves for not having enough faith, that their prayers weren't being answered. It was heartbreaking. It's so true. It's just and I mean, especially, I feel like right now, in the world that we live in, there's so much stuff that it really is not in our control. But when people are kind of trained to start taking it all on themselves, it's just, it's too much. It's too much. Yeah. And I think that is part of also the manipulation that ends up kind of breaking people down and wearing them out, because all of this stuff that they're carrying and they're taking personal responsibility for just becomes so heavy.
You bet. You bet.
Yeah. So yeah, that was season 2, episode 2, all about the secret. People like that episode a lot.
We started off with a bang. We made it the second episode of the season.
I know. And honestly though, I feel like we'll come back to it, especially because Christine really, really wants to.
She really hates the secret.
to get her piece in about it. So I'm sure we'll talk about it again. And maybe we'll kind of frame it more in this sense of how it, people don't talk about the secret anymore or the law of attraction, but manifesting is the millennial version, or I guess even maybe the Generation Z version of the secret is manifesting. It's all the same crap though. So I'm sure we'll come back to it.
Strong words from Jean Brown.
All the same crap.
Man.
Yep. All right. Next episode, we talked about multi-level marketing. This is just a fun one. Here you go.
There's an amazing, I'm sure you've seen it. There's an amazing cold open of an episode of The Office where Michael has become involved in a pyramid scheme to sell calling cards.
Yeah.
And Jim, and he's trying to recruit all of his sales reps at the office. And Jim says, this sounds like a get rich quick scheme. And Michael says, yes, we will. We will all get rich quick. Good. Yeah. Very good.
And then Jim says, so you recruit me, and he goes to the whiteboard, right? And he draws Michael draws the lines of all the people, and then Jim just draws the pyramid around it.
I was like, I have to go make a call. Excuse me.
It's amazing. No, it's so good. And Michael Scott is exactly the type of person who would get pulled into an MLM, right? Oh man.
So we're gonna do, Gene, we should really do like a separate podcast, which is just Glenn and Gene recap The Office. It's just we just describe the episode scene by scene, because that was choice podcasting right there. That was peak us.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. No, but we had a lot of fun on that episode, just kind of poking holes in the in the math. The math of MLMs just doesn't add up. The idea that everybody can get rich by, selling to their group of people. Like after a while, the group of people is just all the people in the world, and it's not possible for everyone to continue being profitable in that space. So, and we did try to acknowledge, people can have good experiences in multi-level marketing organizations and with these kinds of efforts, but it's usually only good for people when they're not like banking their whole life on it, because again, the money is just not there. It doesn't add up. The promises that are made financially, they don't materialize. And a lot of what you see is artifice, in terms of people talking about their 6-digit months and that kind of thing. It's just not real.
Well, sure. And the fact that we talked about it on our podcast, which is focused on self-help products, services, organizations, personalities, I think really highlights the kind of gross overlap between gross self-help and gross MLMs. Mm-hmm. Very often, the types of products, so MLMs sell all sorts of products, but very often the types of products sold by MLMs are in that self-improvement vein. You get a lot of supplements. You get a lot of things that's, are supposed to lead to a higher quality of life. So often the products themselves are kind of self-improvement products. Mm-hmm. But MLMs are writ large a self-improvement scheme, right? Like they are sold as improve your life, sell these products, get involved with this organization. And they're explicitly sold that way. Like the marketing for joining an MLM, what do they always show? They always show like the big house, and you're gonna have a pool, you're gonna have a car, right?
It's and just the flexibility, the lifestyle where you're in charge, that whole entrepreneurial idea, which is also really interesting with MLMs, because this sales structure and the structure of the company is actually very rigid. But they're kind of presenting this idea of they're selling this idea to you of make your life more flexible, be your own boss, work on your own terms. But then you're following this scheme that's very rigid. So it's kind of an interesting thing that they try to sell it that way. And that's not how it actually is.
Our audience has some thoughts about this. Michelle, the bit about send $1 and your name will be sent into a list of 12. And then it might be the case that when I was dropped out of school and really acting out and stuff, I got one of these letters and I thought, you know what, but it wasn't $1, it was $5. Mm-hmm. And this struck addiction-addled Glenn's brain as a great idea. And sadly, none of those, I never got any of that money back. It's weird, right? I never got any of that money back.
That is weird, eh?
Something that came up in our MLM episode, was that so many of these MLMs actually tend to target women. Like there's a very specific stay-at-home mom, you can have it all, retire your husband. I think we had just watched Lula Rich, if I remember right.
Yes.
Which really talks about the gross overlap and exploitation of, like, there's so much of self-help that in the end ends up being really misogynist. And these types of MLMs are a really good example of that. It's not on its surface. But you often see this, I mean, I don't want to go on a tangent, but you often see this in kind of the new thing in self-help culture is to this essential gender stuff. Of, Tony Robbins and our old friend James, is constantly talking about how if you're a dude, your problem is you're not masculine enough. If you're a woman, your problem is you're not feminine enough.
Yeah.
It's really misogynist at the end of the day.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway.
All right. Our next clip, episode 4, we had Dr. Christine on. So let's hear from Dr. Christine.
In that time period, what was so fascinating to me was how most people tried to distance themselves and say, that would never have happened to me. And it became my mission in my teaching and in my writing around this to try to convince everybody that when you have that heady mixture of esoteric spirituality and modern psychology, when you have these really powerful and persuasive arguments all coming together, and you have people who are seekers, who have self-control, who want more of it, and these are really smart, successful people who are looking for all the good things in life. If you had been there, that could have been you too.
Yeah, this is Dr. Christine talking about kind of her reaction to the Sweat Lodge, which is, we met Christine Whalen because she had written some articles around the time of the Sweat Lodge tragedy. And we were like, oh man, somebody gets it. She understood because she had been studying this industry. She understood the type of person that was at the Sweat Lodge, as opposed to so much of the stuff that, was kind of like the kind of feeling about the type of people who would have been at an event like that was like, oh, these are just kind of like weird, fringy type people. And actually there was a lot of successful business people, a lot of people who have their own businesses, and people who were just highly, highly motivated to get to the next level. And it was like one of those, every once in a while, we've had these moments in trying to kind of tell Kirby's story where you're just like, oh, finally, it's like such a relief when somebody gets it and you're like, yeah, you understand. And for many, many years, there were not many of those moments. In the last few years, there have been many more, which has been great.
You bet.
Yeah, for a long time, it was just not that way. So it was great to meet Christine and have someone who really understood.
Oh, you bet. I mean, the thing about folks who get really involved in these self-help ecosystems, like whether it was you're heavily into the James Arthur Ray stuff. By the way, one of the reasons why we talked about MLMs was because so many of these self-help ecosystems are structured like an MLM. They're like, okay, recruit other people to get involved. You get a discount for the next event and stuff. But what occurs to me about the people who say wound up at Sedona, there was this attitude like, well, if you're going to be a needy weirdo, right? If you're going to be a weirdo who signs up for this kind of thing in the first place, and if you're going to be so needy that you're going to be, follow a self-help guru anyway, well, you kind of get what you deserve, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, spiritual warrior cost almost $10,000 to go to.
Yeah.
By definition, you needed to be kind of successful to even find yourself there. Like these were not folks who were struggling, at least in that aspect. There's a great book, because not a Seek Safely podcast can go by without Glenn recommending 10 books. But I've mentioned it before. There's a great book written by Connie Joy titled Tragedy in Sedona. And she was part of this James Arthur Ray ecosystem for a long time, and describes in this book how she was a very successful real estate person, and most of the people who were involved were very successful. They had to be to even be there.
Yeah.
So it's such a good point. I love whenever we have Christine on, because she is so smart and so articulate. Like she's kind of like what I want to be. Like she's really smart and really articulate. And,
yeah, totally.
And her self-help geekness is not as cringe as my self-help geekness, as we saw last night.
Oh, it was good fun. All right, here's another one. I think we're going to stay here for this one.
So I explain all this to my students and say, hey guys, this is a particular place in time where we have this particular messaging, and it wasn't always this way. And it's not to say the old way was bad and this way is good, or this way is bad and the old way was good, but just to know that just like beauty is socially constructed, our approach to our problems are socially constructed and done in a historical context. So this idea of the therapeutic gospel and how widespread it is and how widespread self-help messages are is something, it's in the air we breathe. And so it's almost gotten to the point where it's hard to talk about and educate people on because it is so intrinsic to us.
Yeah, that episode with Christine, we broke into 2 parts because we had just have so much to talk about with her all the time. And one of the things, as you're saying, she articulates things so well. And one of the things that I love about her work with the self-improvement world and self-improvement literature and advice literature, she really has focused on kind of like putting it into perspective in the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And so what she was talking about in that clip was this idea of, the way that we approach problem solving in our lives is very like self-focused in a way that it hasn't always been in society. And this whole, our kind of like emphasis on our mental health and kind of what's going on in our inner world is like kind of a very new concept that really feeds into this whole self-help industry. But that it wasn't always necessarily like that for good and, for good and for bad. But it was such a very interesting observation. And I really like how she frames those types of things.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, there's this whole thing going on with self-help where when you get involved with a teacher or an organization or a system, there's very much kind of an in-group, out-group thing happening, right? Like, so you get involved with a guru and kind of the feeling is, look, those guys who are not with us, those guys who aren't hip to our jive, right? That's me being cool. Those people who don't believe in this stuff, those losers, let them go on with their stupid little lives and not make any money and be frustrated. Like we these select chosen few, like we know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And it's my observation that like that kind of fosters this kind of toxic individualism of like, well, screw them. I'm with the cool kids, right? Like I believe in The Secret. I do whatever. And, some people you just can't help, man, if they're not going to believe in the stuff.
Yeah. And you only want to put your energy and your effort where it's going to come, it's going to give something to you as well. So like you're just dropping toxic people left and right, toxic people in quotes, because they're like energy vampires, right? And they're not serving you. And of course, like there's validity to the idea of having boundaries in your life with people who aren't good for you, but there's definitely a different extreme that a lot of self-help rhetoric takes that to, for sure.
The difference is like, so in trauma and addiction recovery, we set boundaries because we want to stay alive and we want to be safe and stable. The kind of boundaries that people tend to try to set when they get involved with various self-help movements is like, I'm going to set boundaries because their toxicity is going to prevent me from getting a car. Right. Their toxicity is going to prevent me from being, the best version, i.e. the richest version of
Yeah.
myself. So it's very different.
Or like they're just a bummer because I'm focusing on the positive
That's right.
and they're acknowledging that everything is maybe not always so great. And it's bringing me down.
True
Oh
story.
yeah, there's definitely a difference. Okay, so next clip is from our 6th episode about self-help's intensifying flirtation with conspiracy theories.
Oh,
You know, for so long, you know, self-help, like the lifeblood of self-help has been this idea that, you know, man, the mainstream narrative won't work for you. And the normal sources of support or information, like that's not what you need. You need kind of what we're selling. I think the pandemic offered this just giant opportunity for self-help, because like now on this massive visual scale, you could see the normal sources, quote unquote, the normal sources of support and information in our culture just for not getting the job done, right?
Mhm, yeah.
Like you saw confusing messaging about masking coming out of the CDC, right? And I'm just imagining kind of all of these self-help practitioners like looking at all of this going, man, this is our moment.
Yeah. Yep.
yeah, that sounded like a late night episode. Man, you can really see
That was your Will Arnett.
self-help practitioners. I
Uh.
remember that episode. I like that episode because like, so I like anytime that we get into the roots and history of self-help. Because I think it's really important. And this is something that Christine and I, we text about this all the time, about how there's nothing new under the sun in the self-help world. And if we can identify kind of the way that this stuff is cyclical, like somebody said in the chat a little while ago, I thought manifestation started with The Secret. Oh no,
Yeah.
you sweet summer child. Oh no, it's been around forever. And these things are so cyclical. And one of the things that is cyclical that keeps coming around is that you can't trust the mainstream narrative. You can't trust the authorities. You can't trust the government. You can't trust anything. Self-help has very often positioned itself as alternative healing, alternative health, alternative. And it's such a short leap from alternative healing to what our former president would say, alternative facts. You remember that one? We're putting out alternative facts. And they said it with a straight face.
Yeah.
Which is really kind of incredible.
Yeah. No, it was definitely it's a moment that was like just like made for self-help and this kind of mindset.
We just saw James Arthur Ray doubled down on the conspiracy thing too. So a few weeks ago, he released a video that Jean Brown texted me with her hair on fire. I was in the middle of a run and I was like, "Oh my God, who died? Are you okay?" And it was this video from that James had released where he tries to marry the concepts of distrust in the government. And he's clearly speaking to kind of, you know, the conspiracy minded, like he's clearly speaking to people who use the word deep state unironically. And he talks about his trial in the Sedona Spotlight as this government conspiracy to bring him down, because, you know, the government's top priority was bringing down James Arthur Ray, you know, the secret guy. They were.
It's always, the government is always going after independent thinkers and people who are trying to help other people be independent thinkers. Yeah, that was his thing. And
so we see it over and over again, like self-helpers, self-help gurus trying to lean into the conspiracy thing, because again, they know that that's fertile ground. They know there are plenty of people who are being like, yeah, man, the government is problem is the government does sometimes lie to us, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm a trauma therapist. Ask me about MK Ultra. The government absolutely lies to us sometimes. It's a problem.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah. Oh yeah, we'll have more to say about that, I'm sure, at some point.
Yeah, we really do. We need to talk about that, but go on.
All right. Our 7th episode, we talked about trauma. This was another great episode, largely in part because you have so much to bring to the table when it comes to talking about trauma. So here's the clip. Now, this has long been a big criticism that we have of the self-help industry, and something that, you know, my parents identified being mental health professionals themselves. They said, okay, it's really interesting. You know, he brings people up on stage in front of an entire group, which is a very vulnerable position in and of itself, and then encourages them to share these really deep personal things. And then what happens after that? Like, there's no follow-up for these people. And we know that, you know, at one of James Ray's events, 3.5 months before Spiritual Warrior, there was a participant who took her own life in the course of the event. And we don't know what happened to her. It's a very sad story. Her family was completely blindsided. They didn't think that she was in a place where she would do something like that. Something happened at that event that caused her to do that. Didn't realize this clip, we were still going to be talking about James Ray, but
It's your favorite thing to talk about.
Oh, it's my favorite thing to talk about. Yeah. Yeah. But that, you know, this idea of there are a lot of things that happen at these types of events that really are dangerous for people who might be in any sort of vulnerable headspace. One of them being, you know, this like kind of group therapy, bringing people up on stage, encouraging people to talk about really private, personal things. We see that a lot in especially the self-help that's specifically aimed at people with trauma histories.
You bet. And so everyone listening knows that one of my passions is trauma-informed everything. The way that many self-help seminars, and again, James Arthur Ray happens to be the example here, but he's certainly not the only one. The way they do business is kind of the epitome of trauma uninformed, including kind of this very vulnerable, risky kind of large group awareness training format. We have people, you know, talking about, some cases talking about their trauma history, like on a microphone in front of a bunch of strangers, with no expectation of what'll happen next. The thing that we were discussing, that clip in particular, has always struck me as one of the saddest stories in the history of the world. For people who don't know, the deaths at Spiritual Warrior 2009 were not the first time people had died at a James Arthur Ray event. He had an event several months prior called Creating Absolute Wealth, I believe. I think that was it. Where one of his participants, they're involved in an exercise where everybody had dressed as homeless people and they'd spread out in the community. And the challenge was to like make do for a day with like no resources, like a homeless person. James Arthur Ray has never had to do this, by the way. James Arthur Ray is a white dude who has never had to have that kind of resourcefulness in his life. So he has no business teaching anybody about that kind of resourcefulness. But one of the participants in the course, they were not supervised. They were not supported. They were not supervised. One of his participants, all it looks like, took her own life, died. And it looks to have been a completed suicide at the event. Now, at the event, they didn't even tell the other participants what had happened. They got them all back on a bus, brought them back to the hotel. They kept everything super, super quiet. Another great example of a trauma uninformed thing to do. Like, we know that after a traumatic stressor, whether or not the person actually sees it or not, they were going to find out. Everybody was there and knows what happens now.
Yeah.
We know that debriefing after a traumatic stressor can be enormously helpful, can actually inoculate some folks against developing PTSD. It can inoculate some folks against survivor guilt. So it was just such an example of the lack of understanding on the part of this particular self-help guru of trauma-informed practice. But again, it happens all the time. We got in this episode talking about Teal Swan, I think, a lot, right?
Yeah. 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 So our next episode, we talked about the story of Peter McWilliams. I liked this episode a lot, actually. So I have not exactly a clip, but it was kind of like a little thing I put together that, kind of summarized some of the main points from the Peter McWilliams story. Here you go.
Is that your handiwork? Did you do that?
I did do that.
Well done. You're so good
Actually,
at all.
I actually really like this music. I was like, maybe we should use that for our opening music, because we realized we actually have a little musical overlap with the a little bit culty
with
podcast,
Sarah
so-
Nippy. That's true.
Yeah. So like maybe we'll get to use a new song for our intro for the next few seasons. But yeah, Peter McWilliams.
So that story of Peter McWilliams, and I'm restraining myself from just repeating the story now because it is fascinating. It's kind of exactly what we set up this podcast to do. So we started out necessarily talking about how our org started with the tragedy in Sedona. We did a whole episode about how I became involved and kind of my journey in self-help. All those were in season 1 of our podcast. But we've always said that we don't want to stay fixated on the guy that we've been talking about all hour. We don't. I hate his guts. He hates my guts. It's fine. What we actually want to do is tell more of these stories about the exploitative nature of kind of the industry itself, how it can get and be very exploitative and very predatory, not on accident, but it's designed that way. And the story of Peter McWilliams is really an example of that. What I can tell everybody is if you get the chance, go on eBay or somewhere and find the book Life 102, What to Do When Your Guru Sues You. It's no longer in print because Peter's guru sued him and got the copyright to the book. Is now out of print. But it tells that story better than we ever could. But that episode, contains my summary of it. So good. Peter McWilliams, rest in peace. You can't afford the luxury of a negative thought. That's his magnum opus. You can't afford the luxury of a negative thought. Peter McWilliams.
And one of the other things that has always been a goal on our podcast too is just to kind of tell stories that demonstrate the other ways that these types of these forces of control and coercive control, how they pop up, and how it happens in self-help, and then we see it mirrored in other ways as well. So the next clip is from our interview with memoir author Joelle Temraz. Her book is The Secret Practice, 18 Years on the Dark Side of Yoga. And it tells the story of a more interpersonal relationship, although there's a lot of crossover because he was like a guru figure, and there was a yoga center that they built, and there were other people involved too. It wasn't like she was the only one who was kind of manipulated by him and taken in by his story. But she's a great guest. Her book is wonderful, and here's a clip from that.
I don't think the practices themselves are the problem. They are the lure, though, into that particular organization, or in my case, manipulative relationship. He did try to keep finding things that would be of interest, things that made it sound like there were next levels. So I think there's research going on as to what else can we teach these people, or you talked about NXIVM, or maybe there was an escalating level of things you could learn, or roles you could play. And I think that's part of the hook as well. Do we human beings have a tendency to believe in hierarchy and authority? And I'm here now at a particular level. I want to be there tomorrow. How do I get there? Now, Jean, you've got the key. So I'm going to follow Jean now because she's going to tell me how to do it. And I would get there. She's like, Joelle, you're not quite there. There's this next level. Now, meanwhile, her brain keeps working because she's like, I need to keep building these levels of essentially of ensnarement. Now, I know we can't live without hierarchy at all in all of life, but in these particular spiritual, physical practices, I would just caution about these hierarchies and layers.
Yeah, so Joelle did an amazing job of laying out kind of red flags for people to look for. We talk a lot about red flags. We have red flags up on our website. And so, yeah, in that one, she's talking about this idea of like hierarchies in the organization or in the group or even in the journey, you know, that because it's so easy then for the person who's doing the manipulating to keep manipulating this hierarchy so that you're never achieving what they've promised that you're going to achieve, right?
You bet.
Yeah.
No, it reminds me of something that Sarah Edmondson talks about in The Vow, and she really talks about in her book. Her book is titled Scarred. But she really talks about how a NXIVM hierarchy was a huge thing. And they had the sashes, right? And they really kept Sarah like on the cusp for a really long time. Like they wouldn't let her get to that next level, which incidentally, again, is kind of an MLM structured thing. That next level is where she was going to be able to make money as a trainer, as a leader, like whatever it is. But they really manipulated the hierarchy to keep people striving. It's very similar to what Scientology does with their OT levels. Like, so you get to this level, like, oh, okay, but you really need to be on that level, right? You really need to be kind of on that level. I can't help but notice that in that clip, Joelle used as her example of like the next self-help guru to follow. She goes, now, Jean, you have the key. Was this a preview of coming attractions? Are we going to get Cult of Jean? Like, has this all been just a big cover?
I'll be the most unassuming cult leader ever.
Maybe you're hiding in plain sight. Jean.
Oh, I don't think I'm organized enough to be a cult leader.
Same. Oh my God. No joke.
to create all these hierarchies and levels, I'll just be like, I don't know, what level are you guys on again? Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, sure. I guess there's another level too.
I'm just too lazy to be a cult leader. I'm just too it's just so much hassle. Like I can't.
It's a lot of work. I mean, I'll give these people that they put a lot of work into.
It's true.
Into this stuff. Oh, okay. Our next episode, I've got 4 more clips here.
All right. There
was a double clip from one episode. So the next episode was we had Dr. Christina on again. I don't remember which clip this is, but we were talking about Enlighten Us. My favorite movie.
Your favorite.
My takeaway always to my students and to anybody I talk to about Sedona is that if you had been on that retreat, that could have been you. You could be dead too. And I think that the problem with the Enlighten Me documentary was that the documentarians had that distance that we really like to have. Like, oh, those stupid people who were doing stupid things. It would never happen to me. I would know better. And so I spend a lot of time with my students and tried even in that early op-ed to say, no, the reason why we have to pay attention to this is because that mix of esoteric spirituality, modern psychology, and quite frankly, sleep and food and water deprivation, that leads to a mix that is deadly for anyone. So, Jean, one of the reasons I hated the Enlighten Me documentary was because it seemed kind of smug and separated in a way that I actually think doesn't do anybody any favors and puts us all more at risk.
Hilarious that that's the clip. And then we had the other clip from earlier that was kind of similar, actually. And then remember how I talked about how I loved Christine early on because she brought that perspective, and it was like, finally somebody gets it. Obviously, I really, really like that when she talks about that.
Music to Jean Brown's ears. So interestingly, so since we did that episode, just recently, Sarah and Nippy did an episode of A Little Bit Culty with Sarma, and I never know how to pronounce her last name, but
Sarma Mengalis, I think, or
something like that.
Yeah,
Sarma. She and I are kind of friendly on Instagram. We chit chat a little bit, but the restaurateur who is victimized by this person she calls Mr. Fox, but it's all chronicled in the Netflix documentary series Bad Vegan. And one of the things that Sarma has been talking a lot about recently is how misrepresentative of her experience that docuseries actually is. And she and Sarah and Nippy had a really candid conversation about that, about how, when you're not the one choosing the shots and when you're not the one choosing the quotes and whatnot, even if you're at the center of a documentary, it can really be manipulated to serve a narrative. And it reminded me so much of the kinds of things that you and your family have said about Enlighten Us, the documentary that talks about James Arthur Ray, like right after being in prison.
Yeah. It's I haven't listened to that episode yet when they talk with Sarma again. I had listened to like when they first had her on, and I loved her story too, again, because it was one of these stories where it wasn't like a self-help event that she was at. It wasn't a self-help guru that she was at. It was a more interpersonal relationship, a one-on-one relationship, but the type of manipulation, the means of manipulation, and the tactics were all exactly the same. And I loved that Sarah and Nippy from A Little Bit Culty had spoken with her, because again, it was that idea of like, they get it. Like they get this sense of like this type of coercive control that we're starting, that even the legal system is starting to understand it in romantic relationships now. We're starting to understand how that's playing out in these like self-help settings as well. So I am looking forward to listening to that episode with Sarma, and I'd love to talk to her. She seems like a really cool, interesting person.
Love to talk to Leon. Leon is the star of the show, man. Leon the Pitbull.
Oh, little doggy. Always talk to the doggies. In our 11th episode, Man Cave Bacon Eating Energy. We talked about the manosphere.
We did. The Dr. Heath episode.
Yeah. Yes. All right, here we go. The point that it makes is that the patriarchy, it's easy to see how it's not great for women. But the reality is that it's not great for men either, because it puts a lot of pressure on men to be a certain thing, to look a certain way, to be a certain type of person, to achieve a certain amount of success, to have a particular type of relationship, to like certain things. And the manosphere is just telling people how to succeed in that system and how to achieve those particular goals. but it's not challenging the system itself, which, I think, and Barbie and apparently the people who have spent over $1 billion going to see the Barbie movie would agree that, the system is the problem, not the people who are pushing against the system. I love that. I've seen the Barbie movie again since then too, by the way. I love it.
You got to
so
talk
much.
about Barbie. I liked the Barbie movie.
Yeah.
I like the Barbie movie a lot.
That's so fun. My 11-year-old loves it.
I'm positive that's the case. I wonder why that is. I wonder why that is.
So yes, this was the manosphere basically is like self-help specifically for men.
Yeah.
But the point I was making there was that it's just selling this misogynistic idea of what it means to be a man to men, which is problematic.
Well, I mean, and the point I think you made too is let me mansplain the point you made.
Yes,
the point
please.
that you made. Part of what I heard you saying was that it's not just misogynistic, but it's not doing men any favors either. To buy into this idea of masculinity is actually not terribly complimentary toward men either. So that episode, give you a little bit of behind the scenes of the Seek Safety podcast. That episode manifested because I had been really annoyed by somebody on twitter.com. This wannabe influencer who goes by the name of Dr. Heath, who some in our chat know. But he decided one day he wanted to be a thing on Twitter, and he was going to try to create this brand through kind of very traditional. So he claims to have PhDs in like neuropsychology and forensic psychology. He's not a psychologist, but he claims to have been a therapist for years, and he was going to push his brand with these very traditional tropes of masculinity. And it was funny because he signed up for like 10 Twitter accounts. And they each have science in their name. Like, so the one is like masculinity science, and one is like relationship science. But the stuff he tweets has nothing to do with science. They're just his ideas about what makes for a man, and what makes for masculinity, and what makes for, And unfortunately, there's a flavor of influencer just like him. It's not him yet, but there are flavors of influencers just like him. And we talked about Andrew Tate a little bit. Who amass these huge audiences because in the end, there's a certain type of seeker who I don't think wants actual science. They want their ideas reinforced. The ideas they already have about masculinity or whatever reinforced. Yeah. So it kicks open a conversation about, like this gender essentialism that we talked about a little bit ago. Like that has always been a staple of certain corners of the self-help world. If you're a dude, and you're having problems, it's probably because you're not masculine enough. And if you're a woman who's having problems, it's probably because you're not traditionally feminine enough. Really gross.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because as we get into some of these discussions about like recurring themes in self-help, I think for a long time, self-help would have considered itself like sort of progressive. Right. But then when we get into these conversations, and it's similar to how Christine has pointed out, like the whole like Christian corner of self-help, that's like, again, very, very like kind of extreme traditional values type stuff. Then you're like, oh, maybe it's not this like progressive, like love and light space, the way it tries to present itself, that you're getting a lot of other ideas that you might not have actually signed up for when you got into it in the first place.
Sorry.
So
in our chat, our audience member Cindy points out he's on. I assume she's talking about Dr. Heath. He's on TikTok as well. His TikToks are the creepiest thing in the history of the universe. He looks directly into the camera and he talks very
like
slowly and like short, like I think he saw a video of like how to make a good TikTok video. It's like speaking short sentences, and he's like, the next time you come across a challenge, say to yourself, I can do it. And I'm not exaggerating. That's like the level of his advice. Real men. Oh, it's gross. It's gross.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's all right. I'll skip that. Okay. Let's skip that. All right. Our last clip. This was our 12th episode, which is kind of like a little review of the season, which is kind of like what we did just now. Here you go.
In self-help, traditionally, we've seen this phenomenon of people go to an event and get all hyped up, feel like $1,000,000, and decide that they also want to spread the joy. And so they want to either become a life coach or whatever. But the idea, it's kind of this evangelical, spread the gospel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
MLMs explicitly do that. I think self-help events kind of implicitly do that. And very often, and not for nothing, I mean, very often do have kind of this pyramid structure of if you refer 2 friends to the next seminar, then you get some sort of discount and whatever. But MLMs codify that. And they're like, okay, so you bought this product that you love. That's somehow not enough. Like, are you saying you don't love it enough to try and share it with other people and whatnot? Like I often say about self-help that if everyone kept their involvement with self-help of like, yeah, I read a good book and there were some interesting, useful ideas and that's it would be fine. We wouldn't have to exist. Seek Safely wouldn't have to exist. But there's this thing in self-help culture that is ported right over to MLM culture explicitly of, well, man, if you got this much value from this product, why wouldn't you want to go deeper? Like, why wouldn't you want to get more involved in this ecosystem?
Yeah.
And I just listen to that guy and I go, get to the point, man. Get to that. What are you? Come on.
That's so funny. Yeah, no, that was and I remember in that clip then I went on to say part of what is happening is they're building this this really strong feeling of awe through the kind of tactics that they use at these events to give you this sense of like you had a life-changing experience, and that's serves both to get you to buy further into it and to get you to try to convince other people to get into it.
Wow.
And yeah, we're going to have some more about that and what is actually going on in your brain when you're being exposed to this like environment of this like, awe-inspiring moment. Yeah.
You bet. The thing that occurs to me about all of these clips or all these episodes that we've done. Can you believe we've done all of these episodes? Like we got 6 or 7 in. I'm like, well, surely that's the end. And we're here like 11 in.
I know. I think this is our longest live stream so far because there's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. Well, that first night your mom was hustling us off the stream. She's like, anyway, moving on. Hi, Jenny. I know you're watching. Hi, Jenny. How are you? We love you. But then again, given my preference, we'd be on like for hours and hours and hours, which is what we'll probably do on my page in a few minutes after we end here. But anyway, no, what occurs to me about all of these episodes is, we restrict our discussion about them to kind of the bare essentials, and we talk for maybe, 50 or 60 minutes about them. But they're all such rich topics that we could talk for a few hours. The self-help industry is huge and it is growing. It has always been the largest single genre of literature. It's one of the biggest categories of products and services that are sold and consumed in the United States, let alone worldwide.
Yeah.
And when you think about how little oversight and how little regulation exists for this massive category of products, services, and literature and whatnot, it is astounding. It is astounding that I can just write a book and say whatever and throw it on the shelves of a bookstore, and there's no particular oversight over whether the stuff in that book is necessarily true or useful or dangerous or whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. It's, I remember a few years ago seeing when I still lived in Toronto. Toronto has the largest public library system in the world. It's really awesome. It's quite amazing. But when they released their list of the most checked out books, all that kind of stuff, like the top list for the year, self-help was the most checked out, the most read genre. And I was like, well, there you have it. It's not even like fiction. It's like self-help. So yeah.
And very few people want to talk about it because there's always been this sense of shame around it.
Yeah.
Like I even remember when I was a kid and I was first discovering the self-help genre as a teenager. Of course, now I'm 46 and I think anybody under 30 is a kid. Anybody under 40 really is a kid. These kids. Several kids in our chat room right now. You kids, you wacky kids. No, when I was a teenager and prowling around the self-help section of Barnes and Noble, I remember kind of feeling ashamed about it, like feeling like, oh man, what kind of a loser reads self-help?
As the kids would say, it's a little cringe.
It's a little cringe. You heard it here. Now, of course, I co-host a podcast talking about self-help, and I'm board president of an organization that deals with self-help. But the point being that it's huge and it is not talked about near enough because there is this stigma. A lot of people go to self-help events. It's kind of the kind of thing where you don't want anyone to know we're going to the self-help event.
Yeah.
But Tony Robbins, for example, my boy Tony Robbins is one of the most influential personalities of the last 2 decades, without a doubt, on our culture. Every now and then he pops up in, like, there's an episode of Family Guy where he's a character. He popped up in that Jack Black movie. And part of what makes it funny when kind of, there are cultural references to Tony Robbins is everyone knows who he is.
Yeah.
But no one wants to admit that they went to an event or that they read a book or something.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So this is what we're up against. Like, we are a voice in this conversation because it's a conversation that needs to happen. When you donate to Seek Safely, you are allowing that conversation to continue to get louder, to get wider. The more conversations we can have on our podcast about folks like Peter McWilliams, the more we can share stories like Joelle's, the more awareness we bring to the fact that, lots and lots and lots of people access these products, these services, these personalities. And these conversations need to be had. They need to be had on a larger, louder level. So that's what your donation goes to, is helping amplify our voice for ethics, accountability, and transparency in this space.
Yeah. So if you want to help support us, if you're able to, we definitely appreciate it. Somebody dropped the link in the comments to Dr. Glenn's Facebook fundraiser. You can also go to seeksafely.org and you can donate there, or on our Facebook page if you're watching on our Facebook page. We've also got our auction going on right now, which is a way that we feel like we can kind of like give back to you as you support us. So we always really enjoy that. And there are links to that again on our website and on our Facebook and social media. So I want to thank everybody who stuck around with us. It seems like we had like a core group of people who were kind of hanging out the whole time. So thank you guys so much for listening. We very much appreciate it. And we'll be back tomorrow on Instagram again for Ask the Doc. And I know people are excited about this one. On our Instagram at Seek Safely, I put a post up today. I think I put it up there that you can kind of pre-ask some questions that we'll make sure we try to address tomorrow when we do that. And that'll be on again at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And I think that's everything I have to mention. And thank you also to our event sponsors. We have a number of amazing sponsors who, pitch in for the event. And I'll play our little outro. We'll throw up some of their names. So keep an eye on that. And
odds are pretty good that in a little bit, I've got to do some clinical documentation from my day, but odds are pretty good. And a little bit might do some late night bonus live streaming on the Dr. Glenn Patrick Doyle page if you're into it. So
sounds good. Yeah, I feel like I hear it's been a hot. It's been a good time over there. After these live streams. For you, it's only 8:30. For me, it's 9:30, and I might turn into a pumpkin soon if I don't put my pajamas on. So
turn into a pumpkin. Thank you guys so much for listening to our podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching our live streams. Thank you so much for even if it's $1 at a time. Thank you so much for donating to our org. We love you guys. We love you.
Much appreciated. Oh, Dr. Glenn, you just give your listeners some time. She needs to go walk her dog, okay? And then you can start your live stream.
It's about 1:30. I would say we're probably looking at the top of the hour. I would guesstimate.
All right, cool. All right. Well, have fun. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow, Dr. Glenn.
Later, taters.